Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday, and yes, I am talking Far Cry 6. The very, very challenging elements of Far Cry 6. There will be some spoilers in this video. I will try to keep them as minimal as possible. I will do again my overall thoughts, and then be spoilers after this point, and then, like I always do with this stuff. I'm doing this because people have asked me, because I played it on Twitch and then switched over to Horizon, and everybody knows my love for Chicharron. So this is why I'm doing this, and it's an excuse to talk gameplay and design and narrative design and all the things I really, really like. So if you like this sort of thing, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. So, overall impressions of Far Cry 6. It's a Far Cry game. I don't entirely agree. I don't agree at all with the people who say it wasn't different enough from past installments to warrant a numbered game. The every Far Cry game since 3 has been extremely challenging in its own way. I think that in some ways, Far Cry 6 may be the most challenging in that way. Though Far Cry 5, the ending was very, very challenging. And some people didn't like it. And that's, fair. Whether or not you like an ending is a very personal thing. And nobody can force you to like any element of a game you just don't like. And this is going to be the bulk of this video, my requirements for a Far Cry game is that it is essentially a failed or failing state that you are somehow physically trapped in with a larger than life, seemingly all powerful antagonist. There's an element of narco state, meaning, a drug-fueled economy. And because the government is weak and it's in a period of insurrection, you can pretty much do whatever the fuck you want, including wrecking your car into things and hang gliding and, murdering people and all that stuff. They actually contextualize the violence well in these games, and I a good Far Cry game makes me feel uncomfortable while I'm having fun. But then I have so much fun that I just have moments where I feel kind of bad. Chicharron, let's go! Like when you can command a psychotic rooster you took from a cockfighting ring and launch him 8 feet into a guy, and he just that's awesome. And then there tends to be traditional metaphysical elements, and Far Cry 6 hits on every point in that regard. And it's interesting because Far Cry 5, the metaphysical elements were, it was the US, right? So it was essentially, pseudo-Christianesque cult type stuff. And they sort of... Anyway, sticking on Far Cry 6. What impresses me about the Far Cry series as of 3 is how they keep you guessing with that very, very locked-in formula. And I think that the stuff, the initial Far Cry 3 and definitely Far Cry 4 did, people started getting a false impression of the core elements of a Far Cry game. And I mean, Blood Dragons, certainly people are like, oh my god, this is super crazy. And I think people got the sense that the games were silly first, more like Grand Theft Auto in that regard, as opposed to kind of biting geopolitical allegory. And Far Cry has never been that. I mean, Vas in Far Cry 3, he's the secondary antagonist. Vas goes bye-bye halfway through the game. He's the box art character, but and it's interesting because there's a through line from each of Vas, Pagan Min, and what the hell's his name? The guy in the big bad Joseph in Far Cry 5. They all sort of connect in Anton Castillo's and Giancarlo Esposito's really nuanced, understated performance there. You have to hang on every word that character says. It was very impressive how much he did through his performance. They did not have him chewing the scenery the way Pagan Min did. I really enjoyed that. Other people, not so much. I saw a lot of critics complain that Anton Castillo was not in the game enough. And I think they forget how much most main Far Cry villains are actually in the game. I also think that it would have made no sense to have him in the game more based on the story they were telling. But with the connection to Vas is that Anton Castillo, like Vas, as a person who grew up on Yara, which is the fictional setting in Far Cry 6, he is as much a victim of his culture as and the forces of colonialism on his culture as he is a bad guy, a villain, right? Then you get sort of the Pagan Min thing of it's Giancarlo Esposito, man. I mean, dude's cool. And there is sort of a flair. It's not the same. He has that more reserved thing the way, I hope I'm getting the name right, that Joseph does in Far Cry 5. There's more of that menace. There's less of the swag that Pagan Min has. But you similarly, you sort of see where he's coming from. And then the Far Cry 5 thing, it has that nihilism of, and it one of the things I enjoy about Far Cry series, and I'm really trying to avoid a spoiler here as I wrap up my overall thoughts. Far Cry games 3 onward tend to play with the idea of agency and choice. You can do a lot in the world of the game, in terms of running around and blowing things up. How much you impact the culture geopolitically, on the other hand, is a very nuanced thing, because how much can you really impact a failed or failing state, right? There's a very weak government to influence. And so, I mean, each Far Cry game has sort of addressed that in its own way, right? It was a very personal one in Far Cry 4 with the direct relational connection between Pagan Min and, was it AJ, the main character? A big part of Far Cry games is remembering who you were when you came in all the way through to the end. With Far Cry 3, you had to keep in mind that you were a white tourist running around in tribal tattoos at the end to avoid the bad ending. With 5, it was much more nihilistic and kind of doomed from the outset. And I think 6 combines all of them sort of together. And I think that might be why they have that add-on that you can play, you know, the sort of villain stories. I haven't tried that yet. I want to, but that's eventually if I have time. Um, so this is overall, I enjoyed it. I loved the amigos. Oh my God, super fun. Um, the gear stuff, the gear in terms of a skill tree, I know some people had complaints with that. It didn't personally bother me because I've played so much Far Cry. I really like the fact that you know, the game just drops you in, and if you're an experienced player, it just gets out of your way and lets you do your thing, right? Instead of having that lengthy unlocking, you know, like the death from above and chained kills and all that stuff. I did muck around with the gear later. It's the overall game is very easy, I think, by design, and I'm sorry I discovered the special missions very late because I enjoyed the challenge. You know, the ones where you go around with the thing that's going to explode and you have to stick to the shade, and I found those fun when I finally discovered them. I think they knew that a lot of people would play the game because Giancarlo Esposito's in it, and they wanted to maintain that completion. It the amount of challenge did suffer accordingly. There is some deliberately game breaking gear in that game. Now, um, did those game breaking items make the game fun as hell to play? Yeah, I had a blast with the Vengeance Bow, the Rambo Vengeance Bow. And various things. I think it was more a play the way you want experiment as opposed to we're going to give you a ton of challenge, which is fine because if you want to do those secondary objectives and challenge yourself, you can. The game isn't making you. Now, I know some people don't like that experience, but that is a valid design choice. So I'm not going to criticize the game for being too easy. I will just say I did find it on the easier side of difficulty. I don't think difficulty was the point of the experiment here. So at this point, we are going to get into what I think the point of the experiment was. So spoilers from this point forward. That was plenty, right, without it. I want to talk about the interplay between Danny Rojas, the main character, the different factions in Yara, and then the Castillos, especially Anton and his son, Diego. Interesting name for the son. Interesting name for both of them. But I found, for the most part, the characters, the factional characters, kind of underutilized. The exception being, I thought that it's funny, my least favorite faction and my most favorite faction are in the same part of the game. The Legend of 67 and La Moral. And I think they did that deliberately because they were sort of making a commentary on the renewal, the sort of intergenerational, the struggle is real types. And they made the activist college. No, Momo. Okay, Momo cut my sound out for a moment, so we're just gonna pick that up. They made the activist college student equivalent in the game deliberately annoying, juxtaposed them with revolutionaries from the 60s. And the revolutionaries from the 60s are murder grannies and grandpas, and everybody loves El Tigre. They are super fun characters, and the way they sort of come together and you see the similarities and you see the differences. I avoided La Morale at first because I couldn't stand any of them. The game won me over, not with the characters themselves, who to the very end I thought were snot-nosed little pricks, but the way they interacted and the way the the older revolutionaries showed them kindness. I thought that was some real wisdom right there. I really and it was interesting. I absolutely hated Honron until the moment she died, even though, like, okay, she's a red-haired vegan, I should love it, but oh my god, I wanted to smack that character. But I thought it was sad when she got killed. And well done, game. Like, this is an example of subverting expectations in a way that worked for me. Similarly with the whole, Ubisoft has this thing about protest art, and they did it in Watch Dogs 2 as well. It always feels kind of forced. It's saved in Far Cry 6 because of the Paolo character. I don't know if people are going to, oh, she's defending the trans man character. Paolo actually has an arc that is contingent on, his identity is relevant to it. And the fact that he's coming at it from the perspective of, no matter how things turn out with the war, with the, you know, the uprising against the Castillos, things are still going to be shit for him in Yara. You know, things are not going to get better for him or people like him. And I mean, there's references in the game to the fact that he had top surgery with no anesthetic, which makes him hardcore, and everybody's calling him a coward, right? There's a really nasty fight between him and his girlfriend in the game, where she goes kind of, some people would say they were transphobic comments. I thought that was real, and it showed that the characters aren't perfect, super flawed. I mean, to say not perfect, that goes without saying, but I mean, what's her name? I always forget her. She's got the one blue eye, but she's ratchet as anything. And again, you're like, all right, at the end, she's super rough around the edges, probably rough into the middle, but she's an okay person at heart. Just a lot to take. And then, of course, there's Bisho, who is the heart of that area, and his missions are super cute and awesome, right? And it's funny because now I completely forget the first faction. They were the ones that were sort of middle of the road. The Juan, who you meet, he's one of the first people you meet in the game. He's a really interesting character because he tells you exactly who he is at the beginning of the game. When he talks about how he's worked for pretty much every clandestine group under the sun, you know, from the CIA to the KGB to Mossad to this to that, he doesn't really care who he works for. He has no loyalties. He has no real ideology. He just wants to make these Supremo weapons that kill people in creative ways. Like, he is a likable, terrible person. And he remains a likable, terrible person through the entire game. And I thought that was cool. I mean, it shows the difference between likability and goodness, right? Likability and virtue. And I thought he was a very, very well-developed character. Obviously, he gets a lot of time. I hoped for more from Clara, but I think everything was so tightly packed. I got the point of what they were doing with her. I thought she was the one I wanted more from, not the Castillos. Similarly with some of the, you have to really like read everything and observe the environments to really get the sense of the sub bosses. They're not talking at you the whole time. the way they do in previous Far Cry games, which I think might be some of the thing that people reacted to. But if they actually did smack you in the face with the things these people were into, it may have been too much for people to handle, because I found like the kinky sex photos and all that stuff for those characters, and it was like, okay, show don't tell. And I mean, I also think that the way they handled the drug elements of this particular pastiche of cultures, it's, you know, overwhelmingly Cuban with bits and pieces of Mexico City, right? In places like Nicaragua and things like that. A little bit of Panama. But it, like, the language that they use is Cuban slang. And I thought the way that they showed how, you know, the difference in the treatment of the narco state, the drug state in this game, they were very cautious about it. I think because of the impact of coca on the Latin American world, and the Hispanic Caribbean. So I thought they didn't shy away from it. You know, they have you getting rip roaring drunk, and booze is a drug, so there you are, you got that in there. But the whole Viviro thing and the, you know, the export cash crop killing the locals and, you know, subjecting them to basically modern day slavery, that I thought that was really well done and really quite chilling. And they didn't overdo it, but you certainly got the point. You still were allowed to have fun and do dumb shit, but that was definitely there. Now, the main plot with the Castillos. I left this for last because it makes sense. I do not believe that the narrative of a Far Cry game is the purpose of a Far Cry game. Far Cry games, you supply like 80% of the narrative through your gameplay, which amigos you spend the most time with, what order you do the different regions, how much you complete. I mean, I went through and got as many checkpoints as I could and took out as many anti-aircraft guns as I could, and liked the treasure hunts and everything like that. Other people probably would have just done a straight shot, and the game has dynamic difficulties, so the enemies get harder because if you do more, because I think they wanted people to complete the game. And so I had a very decompressed experience. And I liked that you saw Anton Castillo on the billboards and you saw him on the news, but who was this guy? He was a cipher through a lot of it. And Giancarlo Esposito did some interviews before the game talking about, one of his big questions is, does Anton really love his son? And they determined yes. But the dialogue near the end suggests that is very complicated. And what does love mean to this man who was hardened not just by his father being murdered or you know, assassinated is probably a better term, when Anton was 13, but also his mama was hard, and they dealt with the Black Hispanic identity in a really, really raw way that I'm like, wow, freaking bravo. And he has this really complex relationship with women accordingly, that he'll promote women, but then basically insist they're diversity hires, and you were hired because you were a woman, so now you have to prove your competence by murder. But then he puts a woman in charge of his propaganda, and so he has that transactional sexism, but it I think he just sort of is bitter at the world and will use anything he possibly can. And then of course he has a drag queen as a propagandist, which that was underutilized in the game. You saw these pictures of her all over the place, and she's in the game for like 5 seconds, at least in my playthrough. So maybe COVID had an impact on some of that stuff. I really didn't think it impacted the experience that much. The fact that she was even there was kind of interesting and fun and said something about this world. Like I said, the sort of, because okay, you've got a drag queen as a propaganda tool, and things are shitty for trans people. That says so much. And Yara is it is just a study in contradictions in that way. It's like and you see this in if you do any travel in Latin America, this sort of gleaming Art Deco and more modern buildings where the foreign money is invested, and then everywhere else where your yard is also your garbage dump, right? They really captured the dichotomy of that part of the world, to the point that the people who watch my Twitch channel from that part of the world went, yeah, that looks like my abuela's backyard. Like there's no broken glass on the roofs, so they nerfed it a little bit, but yeah, that looks pretty familiar, which was really interesting conversations with people from like different parts of Mexico and Puerto Rico and various places like that. That was cool. It's cool to have a international Twitch community for that feedback. The interesting thing is, at the end, Anton Castillo dies somewhat unknowable. His big villain speech leaves you with a lot of questions. And like I said near the beginning, you have to hang on his every word to put a picture of this guy together. Unlike Pagan Min, who to me so many parts, will you please fucking shut up? That's just my subjective opinion. I hated Pagan Min. I know I'm in the minority of that. I was much more compelled by the less is more approach to Anton Castillo. Because at the end, I was like, what do I think about this guy? And how is he a foil to Danny Rojas? And what does his choice to kill his own son in his mind to save him mean? And this, to me, is where the agency of the end of this Far Cry game comes from, unlike future and like past games where you actually had, you had that binary ending in 3, and then you had all the different choices of what to do with how do you solve a problem like Pagan Min in 4, and then, the very nihilistic set of very bad choices in 5. I like the fact that 6 leaned into the fact that no, there's no unfucking this. There was no way to get a better ending. You have a choice to kill I like that they made him a Canadian businessman, but kind of a Trump pastiche. I shot him, by the way. That's what my Danny would do. Just coño, pinga. Cause no, what he did to that place was disgusting. And I'm not coming at this from me. I was coming at that from Danny, and Danny settles things with a gun. Cleanest, simplest, right? You killed my friends. But the ultimately failed failed journey to save Diego Castillo by both Danny Rojas and Anton Castillo, I found extremely poignant. The way I interpreted the ending is both of them were trying to save him from becoming like them. And Danny's way of saving him was to save him bodily. Anton's ultimate decision was to save his spirit. That he was trying to build a Yara so that Diego wouldn't have to be like Anton. And when he realized he failed, he spared Diego. Basically, it was like that Les Mis, I dreamed a dream moment with Fantine. That's what I took from that. Because why else would he have put all that into it, teaching him, molding him, guiding him, and then you could claim, the leukemia was affecting his brain, but I think it was deeper than that. I think he determined he'd failed. At that point, Anton Castillo is revealed to be much more like Vas Montenegro. I think that was his last name. Vas in Far Cry 3 than Pagan Min or Joseph. He is ultimately a victim of the culture that created him. And in that moment, he realizes he can't get out. There is no getting out, which is sort of the overall theme of the game. What happens instead of your standard Far Cry game where you crash land somehow, or you come in as, a U.S. Marshal in Far Cry 5, you're a local who's trying to get off on a boat and you can't. The hidden ending is getting off on a boat, right? But if you don't go to Miami, here we go. And so again, you've got the dovetailing between protagonist and antagonist where Yara won't let them leave. And I found that incredibly poignant storytelling, not at all interactive. Those elements aren't. And I think that was sort of deliberate. And I like that because so many other elements, like, what you do and where you go and the types of weapons and the gear and the experiences you have and the amigos. I love the amigos. There's so much choice in what you do physically in the world, but there's no agency at all to change Yara itself. No matter, and the fact that they have, the insurgency post-completion gameplay, I thought that's an interesting interactive commentary, that it just goes back and forth, changes hands, and that's very much a commentary on the fact that in that part of the world, let's face it, they're still fighting the revolutionary war of the 60s. It has never really ended. The choices that they start with a Spanish conquistador boat in the opening. That was the first wave of colonial fuckery in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then, the actions of the CIA during, Bay of Pigs and all that stuff. And then the revolution and, attempts at regime change and then the business, just using it as a source of raw materials and fuck the locals, right? It's there if you already know it. And I thought that was very, very interesting, the fact the game makes you work for that meaning, because it's so dark that people who don't want that experience are going to be completely repelled by it. I appreciated that it was there in the storytelling, and they didn't shy away from that stuff. But it's only there for the people who already sort of know the history and the geopolitics of that area. Because for the people who don't, it's a AAA game. And the person who, Far Cry 6 is me fucking around in a tank painted pink with a face on it, with a psychotic rooster that murders people as my amigo, and guns that shoot CDs that play the Macarena and La Vida Loca. That's their Far Cry 6 experience. That is valid. But a deep dive, subtle geopolitical treatise underneath it for the people that get it, that is also valid. And what I like about the way Far Cry has evolved as a franchise is I think the thing a lot of people don't like. You don't get that ending choice in every game. You got a binary choice in 3. You got a ton of options in 4. You got a binary choice in 5 with the secret ending at the beginning. And then they totally change it. You've got the hidden ending as well at the near the beginning again, but you don't get that illusion of choice, if you will, because I mean in 5 it's all about how do you want to lose this? Because you can't win. The minute you went in as a US Marshal into a territory controlled by these American separatists, like that was realistic. I actually, as challenging as it was, I'm like, yeah, law enforcement gets fucked when they get forced into those scenarios. There's no way to beat those guys on their own turf. Not militarily, not with weapons. But I liked the twist with 6 because I expected some big choice at the end and I didn't get it. And that was the whole point. That's why you have the 67 revolutionaries and their modern day counterparts. And as much as I couldn't stand the college student approximation, the woke college student approximation, at that point, I'm like, yeah, this has all happened before. This will all happen again. There's a reason that, Lucky, the older lady with the beads, is so world weary and yet ultimately kind to Yolanda and company, because that's her name. Yeah. She was like, I was you once and here I am now. And hopefully you will be me one day because you'll live long enough. A lot of people didn't. And so I thought overall, really good job with really challenging subject matter. And now, we get the non-numbered game that's all nutty and bizarre DLC, and this is where they really let rip. But I thought overall, I think they set out to achieve their objectives. And because their objectives were to challenge the player to an extent, not everybody is going to love it. And I think that reflected in the review scores, and that's why I'll stand this game. Because they weren't chasing the 90. They wanted to say something in a game that ultimately is just about fun, but it's fun with a conscience, right? And that's all I can ask for in modern AAA gaming, that they took any modicum of risk at all. So I'm interested to what your guys' comments on this. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with liking the game, but please judge it based on what I've said, not stuff I didn't say. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.